The cameras were rolling. The microphone was live. And 400 guests were mid-sip when Amara Whitfield raised her champagne flute, smiled the most dangerous smile a woman has ever smiled, and said, "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight, because tonight I am divorcing my husband." A fork hit a plate somewhere. One woman inhaled her champagne wrong. A man near the back actually said, "What?" out loud. Then she kept going. "I am divorcing Michael because he is too perfect." The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a dessert knife on your table. Then nervous laughter started. One person, then three, then a ripple of uncomfortable chuckles spreading across the room like a slow-moving wave. Michael stood beside her at that podium, 38 years old, tall, calm, dark suit, no tie, the kind of quiet confidence that never needed to announce itself. He did not move. He did not flinch. He simply stood there with his hands at his sides and his jaw locked tight, and every person watching him could see that he was absorbing something that would have dropped a lesser man to his knees. But Amara wasn't done. She pointed toward a table near the stage. A younger man sat there, mid-30s, loud watch, louder smile, leaning back in his chair like he already owned the room. His name was Victor Langford, and the way he held Amara's gaze across that ballroom told every single person watching exactly what kind of story this was. "A real man has danger," Amara said, her voice carrying clean to the microphone. "Passion, power, not this saint standing next to me." 400 people looked at Michael. Michael looked straight ahead, and in the back corner of that ballroom, a 22-year-old server named Destiny pulled out her phone and pressed record. By midnight, that video had 400,000 views. By morning, it had 3 million. And Michael Whitfield, the man who had just been publicly humiliated in front of the most powerful people in Beverly Hills, walked out of that hotel alone into the rain without a single word. Nobody tells you about the drive home after something like that. Michael didn't call anyone. He didn't pull over and scream. He didn't text a single friend. He just drove through the wet Beverly Hills streets with the radio off and his hands perfectly still on the wheel, thinking the kind of thoughts that only come to the exact moment when everything you built for a decade just falls through the floor. His phone was lighting up with notifications. He flipped it face down on the passenger seat. He drove to a Denny's on Sunset Boulevard, sat at the counter, ordered black coffee and eggs he barely touched. The cook behind the grill, a heavy-set man named Roland with flour on his forearms and a gold wedding band, looked at him once and said, quietly, "Rough night." Michael said, "You could say that." Roland slid a slice of pie across the counter without being asked. No charge, just the way some people speak when they don't have the right words. Michael sat there for 2 hours, and while he sat there, the internet was doing what the internet always does. It picked a side, fast and loud. The hashtag Mr. Perfect was trending in California before 2 a.m. Twitter had already split into two camps. People calling Amara bold and liberated, and people calling her the most reckless woman alive. But the loudest voices, and there were thousands of them, were aimed at Michael. Not cruel, exactly. More like pitying. More like the kind of commentary that cuts deeper than cruelty, because it comes wrapped in concern. He just stood there. Why didn't he say anything? That's not a man, that's a mannequin. She probably had to remind him to breathe. But here's the thing nobody thought to ask. Not one journalist. Not one podcast host. Not one of those 400 guests in that ballroom with their champagne glasses and their opinions. Nobody asked, what exactly did Michael Whitfield actually do for the last 10 years? Because the answer to that question, that quiet, unsexy, undramatic answer, was about to change everything. Aria Digital was a marketing and brand strategy firm based in Los Angeles, with satellite offices in Atlanta and Houston, 300 employees, annual revenue north of $40 million, clients that included household consumer brands, 2 streaming platforms, and a pharmaceutical company whose name you would recognize immediately. Amara Whitfield was the face of all of it. She was on magazine covers. She spoke at conferences. She had a personal brand, polished and sharp, the kind of woman who could walk into a boardroom full of skeptical men and walk out with a signed contract. She wore that company like a crown. But crowns don't build themselves. 6 years ago, when Aria Digital was still a mid-sized agency drowning in outdated systems and losing clients to newer, faster competitors, it was Michael who sat down at their kitchen table in their Pasadena home and spent 11 straight weekends building out a proprietary analytics platform from scratch. Not hired developers, not a tech firm. Michael, alone, coffee, code, a whiteboard covered in diagrams that Amara always said gave her a headache to look at. The platform was called Prism. Prism did 3 things that no other marketing analytics tool in the industry did simultaneously. It predicted audience behavioral shifts before they happened. It automated reporting in real time across multi-channel campaigns. And it integrated with client CRM systems in a way that cut campaign execution time in half. Aria's biggest clients didn't just like Prism. They required it. It was written into contracts. It was the reason 3 of those clients had renewed their retainers 4 years running without negotiating on price. Prism was the backbone of the entire operation, and it was registered legally, formally, in the United States Patent and Trademark Office, under Michael Alden Whitfield, not Aria Digital, not Amara, Michael, because at the time he built it, before the company was truly his wife's empire, and before it quietly stepped back from his own career in systems architecture to become her strategist, her sounding board, her invisible infrastructure. At that time, they were still a team, equal partners. He had filed the patents in his name because she had told him casually over takeout one night, "Just put in your name for now. We'll sort the legal stuff later." Later never came, because later, Amara got bigger. Later, the magazine cover started. Later, the speaking fees and the networking dinners and the glossy profile in Forbes, the one that didn't mention Michael's name once, became the whole story. And Michael, because that was simply the man he was, let her have it. He stepped back, stepped sideways, took a support role that had no title, no public profile, and no credit. He showed up to her meetings as her husband. He debugged her systems at midnight. He stayed on calls with panicking clients while Amara was at charity events in Malibu. His career in systems architecture, the career that had once had recruiters from 3 Fortune 500 companies reaching out to him directly, quietly stopped being his career. He chose her empire over his own. And on their 10th anniversary, in a $14,000 red dress, she pointed to Victor Langford and told 400 people that Michael was too boring to love. Now, be honest with me for a second. Have you ever sacrificed something real, truly real, for someone who didn't even notice you were doing it? Because Michael Whitfield had, for 6 years, in silence. And now the whole world was calling him a robot. Victor moved into the Beverly Hills penthouse 11 days after the gala. His full name was Victor James Langford, 34 years old, born in Scottsdale, Arizona, to a family with old real estate money and newer, shakier debt. He looked like a man who'd been told he was interesting for so long that he'd stopped doing anything interesting to back it up. The watch on his wrist was a Patek Philippe. The car in the garage was a matte black McLaren. Both were technically still on payment plans, but Victor had a talent, rare and genuine, for making things look finished that weren't. He could walk into a room, and within 6 minutes have every person in it convinced he was the most important person there. Amara called it magnetism. Her operations director, a no-nonsense woman named Greta Bassett, called it something else. She had worked for Amara for 5 years, had seen every consultant and partner and investor who'd walked through those glass doors, and when she first met Victor in office lunch 3 weeks after gala, she smiled politely and then went back to her desk and quietly sent an email to her personal lawyer asking about employment protections in the event of sudden change in company ownership. Greta trusted her instincts. She had learned to. Victor, for his part, was on exceptionally good behavior in those first weeks. He was charming at Aria events. He was supportive in meetings. He had opinions on everything: brand strategy, market positioning, the company's expansion plans into Austin and Denver, and he delivered them with the kind of confident looseness that made people think he'd been thinking about these things for years. He hadn't, but Victor was good at sounding like he had. What nobody saw, not Amara, not Greta, not any of the 300 employees who were still quietly whispering in break rooms about Mr. Perfect and the red dress, was what Victor did with his phone when he was alone. The calls he took in the car with the windows up. The messages he deleted immediately. The name, Harlan, that appeared in his contacts under a string of random numbers, whose voice on the other end was always low and always quick, and always ended with the same two words. Stay close. 3 weeks after the gala, a woman landed at LAX on a private flight from New York. Her name was Victoria Hale. If you spend any time in tech or finance, you've heard of Hale Systems, headquartered in Manhattan, with operations in Chicago, Dallas, and San Francisco. A data infrastructure company. Not the kind that gets written about in lifestyle magazines, but the kind that gets written about in the Wall Street Journal when something goes wrong at a bank and the federal investigation traces back to a third-party vendor. Victoria had built Hale Systems from a boutique consulting firm into a $2.3 billion company over 14 years. She was 41. She had brown hair she almost never wore down, a way of looking at a spreadsheet like it had personally insulted her, and a reputation in certain New York circles for being the smartest and least forgiving person in any room she entered. She was flying to Los Angeles because her company was on fire. Not literally. Worse. 3 days before the flight, her internal security team had flagged an anomaly in the access logs for Hale Systems' proprietary client data platform. By the time Victoria had been briefed, it was clear. Someone inside the company had been copying and selling client system architecture data to a competitor. Not just a small competitor. A direct rival bidding on the same federal contracts Hale Systems had spent 3 years cultivating. The breach was deep, the cover-up was sophisticated, and it reached at least 2 senior executives, both of whom were currently on a plane to a conference in San Francisco, unaware that Victoria had already called her lawyers and that their access had been quietly frozen an hour before departure. She was landing in Los Angeles to meet with a crisis communications firm before flying to San Francisco to handle the confrontation personally. What she was not planning was chaos at the airport. But the moment her security team's SUV pulled up to the arrivals terminal to collect her and her assistant, everything went sideways. Her assistant, a 26-year-old named Priya, stepped out to pull the carry-on luggage, and within 10 seconds had been bumped hard by a rushing man in a gray suit who sent her tablet skittering across the sidewalk. The tablet, which was still logged into the Hale Systems secure portal, landed screen up on the concrete. Cracked but lit, visible to anyone walking past. The gray-suited man kept walking. Priya was on her knees reaching for it when a hand, calm, quick, no drama, picked up the tablet, pressed a lock screen, and stood. The hand belonged to Michael Whitfield. He had been picking up a friend arriving on the same terminal. He saw Priya scrambling. He reacted without thinking. He handed the tablet back, noticed a security badge visible on the screen for half a second before it locked, said nothing about it, and was already stepping back toward the curb when Victoria's door opened. She stepped out and took in the scene in about 4 seconds. Tablet secured. Situation handled. Unknown man already walking away. "Wait," she said. Michael stopped, turned. She looked at him the way she looked at spreadsheets. Fast and precise. You saw what was on that screen. It wasn't a question. Briefly, Michael said, "I didn't read it." "How do I know that?" "You don't," he said. "But I'm telling you." Another person, almost anyone else, would have said more, would have been defensive or eager or nervous under that gaze. Michael just stood there, steady, waiting to be believed or not believed, apparently indifferent to which one she chose. Victoria stared at him for a moment. Then she said, "Give me your card." "I don't have one on me." She took out her own, held it out, then "Take mine. Because whatever you're doing in this city, I'd like to know if you're available for a different kind of work." Michael took the card. "Read it once." Looked up. "Hale Systems," he said. "That's right." He put the card in his jacket pocket, gave a small nod, and walked away. Priya watched him go, then looked at Victoria, who was already moving toward the terminal doors, her mind clearly working. "Who was that?" Priya said. "I have no idea," Victoria said. But he didn't panic. That's rarer than you'd think. Michael sat on that card for 4 days. Not because he wasn't interested. Because in those 4 days, he was quietly doing something else. Something he'd been planning with careful patience for longer than anyone who mocked him online would have believed. He called his patent attorney. Her name was Lord Mateo, a compact, no-nonsense woman based in downtown Los Angeles with 3 decades of IP law behind her and a voice like a judge reading a verdict. Michael had been her client for 6 years. She knew the PRISM patents. She knew exactly what they covered and what they protected, and what it meant that they still sat, legally and entirely, in Michael Alden Whitfield's name. You want to start the process? Lord said, I want to know what the process looks like. You pull the licensing agreement. They've been operating under an informal usage arrangement, which, given you have no written contract, is actually an incredibly vulnerable position for them. How vulnerable? A pause. The kind attorneys take when the answer is significant. Michael, without a formal licensing agreement or contractual transfer of ownership, every current contract ARIA has that names PRISM as a service deliverable is built on a system that you technically have the legal right to withdraw. The line was quiet for a moment. I'm not doing anything yet, Michael said. I just want to know what's on the table. Everything, Lourdes said. That's what's on the table. He thanked her, hung up. Then he took Victoria Hale's card from his jacket pocket and dialed the number. She answered on the second ring. I was starting to think you'd lost it, she said. I was thinking, Michael said. About what? Whether I was the right fit for whatever you're dealing with. And tell me what the problem is, he said. All of it. And then I'll tell you. There was a brief silence on her end. Not hesitation, calculation. Victoria Hale was a woman who spent her life deciding who was worth being direct with. She made her decision in about 3 seconds. And for the next 40 minutes, she told him everything. The breach, the executives, the client data, the federal contracts at risk, the rival company moving faster than her team could counter, the crisis communications firm that had given her a plan she described flatly as technically correct and completely useless. Michael listened. He asked 4 questions, clean, specific, no wasted words. The kind of questions that told her immediately that he understood not just the surface problem, but the structural one underneath it. When she finished, he said, You don't have a communications problem. You have an architecture problem. Whoever designed access permission levels on that platform made it too easy for senior users to move data laterally. Fix the architecture. The breach becomes a story about one bad actor. Don't fix it. And even after you fire those 2 executives, it happens again in 18 months. Silence. Then, who are you? Michael Whitfield. Systems architect. Currently available. Why currently available? A beat. Personal situation, he said. She didn't push. She just said, Can you be in San Francisco Thursday? Yes, he said. Then I'll see you Thursday, Michael. She hung up, and for the first time since he walked out of the Grand Monarch Hotel into the Beverly Hills rain, Michael felt something sharp and clear settle in his chest. Not anger, not grief, not the particular heaviness of being made a joke of on the internet. Just direction. Just a clean, quiet knowledge that the story wasn't over. Not even close. Back at Aria Digital, the atmosphere had shifted in ways that only someone paying close attention would notice. Greta Bassett was paying close attention. She had been watching Victor Langford for 3 weeks now, and what she saw did not make her feel better about anything. He was in the office most days. Technically, there is Amara's partner, with no official title, but with an unofficial authority that was spreading through the building like a slow gas leak. He asked questions in financial meetings he had no business attending. He had started taking calls in Amara's private office when she was out. He had suggested, casually but twice, that the company should explore renegotiating terms with 2 of their longest-running client contracts. Greta had blocked both suggestions. Quietly, politely, with paperwork. But the thing that was really bothering her, the thing she couldn't shake, was PRISM. Specifically, a conversation she'd overheard 4 days ago. Victor, in the hallway outside the tech team's floor, speaking low into his phone. She only caught pieces, but 2 of those pieces had stuck. The system ownership question is the real exposure. And then, Harlan says if we move before he does, we control the narrative. Greta had gone back to her desk and sat very still for about 10 minutes. Then she had pulled up the PRISM patent filings, which she had always known existed, but had never had reason to look at carefully. She read through them once. Then again. Then she reached for her phone to call Michael. And then she stopped because she didn't know what side of this she was on yet. She didn't know what Michael was planning. She didn't know if warning him would help or complicate something she couldn't see the shape of yet. So she did what careful people do. She documented everything. Dates, quotes, observations. A private file on a personal encrypted drive she kept off the company network. And she waited. The morning Michael flew to San Francisco, he stopped at a barber shop in Silver Lake. He hadn't been to a barber in 2 months. The man in the mirror, sharper now, a little thinner in the face, with a particular look of someone who had been through something and was still standing, was not the same man who had stood at that podium in Beverly Hills. The barber, an older man named August who had known Michael for years and who had, like everyone, seen the video, was quiet for a long time as he worked. Then he said, simply, "You look like a man who's decided something." Michael met his eyes in the mirror. "Yeah," he said, "I think I have." August gave a small nod, kept working, and said nothing else for the rest of the cut, which was exactly the kind of wisdom that sometimes only shows up in the hands of an older man who has seen enough of life to know when conversation is unnecessary. The conference room on the 42nd floor Hale System San Francisco office had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the bay. On a clear morning, you could see the bridge from the east-facing glass. It was the kind of room designed to remind everyone sitting in it that they were high up and that the view came with conditions. Michael arrived 12 minutes early. He sat at the far end of the table with a single notepad, a pen, and a coffee he bought from a cart in the lobby. No laptop, no presentation, no consultant's folder full of laminated slides. Victoria walked in at exactly the scheduled time, which told him something about her immediately. Not early to perform readiness. Not late to signal power. On time, because on time was the agreement. She sat across from him. 2 other people filed in behind her. Her general counsel, a lean man named Prescott Abrams who looked like he hadn't slept in several days, and her head of internal security, a former federal investigator named Dana Cho, who sat down and opened a tablet without looking up. Victoria folded her hands on the table. "Before we start," she said, "I want to ask you something direct." "Go ahead," Michael said. "You were married to Amara Whitfield." "I was." "Past tense as of 3 weeks ago." "Correct. I know who she is. I know what Aria Digital is. And I know about Prism." A pause. "I did my research before Thursday." Michael held her gaze without expression. "Then you know more than most people," he said. "I know that the system her entire company runs on belongs to you. Legally, yes. Are you here because of her?" The question sat in the room for a moment. Prescott and Dana both went still. Michael picked up his pen, turned it once between his fingers, set it down. "I'm here," he said, "because you have a structural problem that I can fix. What's happening at my ex-wife's company is a separate situation with its own timeline. The 2 things don't have to interfere with each other." Victoria studied him for a long moment, the kind of look that had made grown men uncomfortable in rooms far more intimidating than this one. Then she said, "Fair enough. Show me what you've got." What followed over the next 11 days was a kind of focused, relentless problem-solving that most people only experience once or twice in a career, if they're lucky enough to be in the room when it happens. Michael moved through Hale Systems architecture, like a man reading a building's blueprints in the dark, and knowing exactly where every load-bearing wall was. He didn't need tours. He didn't need hand-holding. He asked for system access at day 1, spent 18 hours alone with the codebase, and by the morning of day 2 had a written assessment sitting on Victoria's desk that was precise enough to make Prescott Abrams read it twice, and then call his own tech consultant to confirm that what it said was accurate. It was. The breach had 2 points of origin, both internal, both involving permission escalations that should trigger security flags, but didn't because of the gap in the monitoring layer that was, in Michael's words, not malicious, just lazy architecture that someone eventually figured out how to exploit. He closed both gaps in 72 hours. Then he redesigned the permission architecture entirely. Not just patched, rebuilt. The kind of rebuild that doesn't just fix the current problem, but makes the next 3 versions of the same problem impossible. Dana Cho, who had spent 2 decades catching people who broke systems for a living, watched Michael work for 3 days before she said anything to him directly. When she finally did, it was brief and straight. "You're very good at this." "I've had practice," he said. "Fixing things other people broke?" He looked up from the screen. "Building things other people needed," he said. "Sometimes it's the same job." Victoria heard about that exchange from Dana. She didn't say anything about it, but she thought about it more than she expected to. By day 9, the 2 executives who had been involved in the data breach had been confronted, terminated, and handed to Prescott and a team of attorneys who were, in Prescott's words, extremely motivated. The rival company that had purchased the stolen data received a legal notice that was described in the financial press as surgical and devastating. 3 of Hale Systems' major federal clients, who had been quietly watching the situation, sent written confirmations that they were staying with the company. One of them added, in a handwritten note to Victoria, "Whatever you changed, the new architecture is cleaner than anything we've seen from a vendor in years." That note came from Michael's work. Victoria put it on her desk. On the 11th night, they were the last 2 people in the building. It was past 10. The cleaning crew had come and gone. The city lights were scattered across the bay window like broken glass, and the office had that particular quiet that only settles in large buildings after hours, a stillness that makes people say things they might not say in daylight. Victoria came to the doorway of the conference room where Michael was still working and leaned against the frame. "You should go back to your hotel," she said. 15 more minutes, he said, without looking up. She came into the room, sat down across from him, didn't speak for a while, just watched him work with the kind of attention she rarely gave anything that wasn't a financial statement. Then she said, "Can I ask you something that's not about the system?" He stopped typing, looked up. "She really did that," Victoria said, "in front of all those people." It wasn't a question. She'd seen the video. Everyone had seen the video. "She did," Michael said, "and you just stood there." "I wasn't going to fight her at our anniversary gala. Most people would have. Most people," he said, "would have made it worse." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "What was it like?" she asked, not prying, genuinely asking, the way someone asks when they actually want to know. Michael leaned back in his chair, looked at the window for a moment, at the lights, at the dark water beyond them. It was like watching someone set fire to something they didn't know they needed, he said, and not being able to explain the danger to them because they were holding the match and smiling. The room was quiet. "I'm sorry," Victoria said. "Don't be," he said. "I'm not." She looked at him. "You're not." "I was for about a week," he said. "Then I realized something." "What?" He looked back at her, steady, clear, that the life I was living wasn't mine. I'd been building someone else's story for so long I'd forgotten I had won. Something shifted in Victoria's expression. Not dramatically. She was not a dramatic woman. But something moved behind her eyes that had not been there before. She stood up, straightened her jacket. 15 more minutes, she said. "Then you're going back to your hotel." "Yes, ma'am," he said. She walked to the door, stopped, didn't turn around. "Michael." "Yeah." Asterisk for what it's worth. Whatever she called boring. The thing that makes you sit alone in a room for 11 days and just fix a problem without needing anyone to watch you do it. She paused. "That's not boring. That's rare." She left. Michael sat there for a moment. Then he went back to work. While Michael was in San Francisco rebuilding a billion-dollar company's infrastructure, Victor Langford was in Beverly Hills doing what Victor Langford did best, spending money that wasn't his. The man named Harlan, full name Harlan Briggs, a gray market financial operator with ties to 2 ongoing SEC investigations that nobody had connected him yet, had given Victor a very specific assignment. Get close to Aria Digital's financials. Identify leverage points. Find out who controlled what. Victor had been doing exactly that, with a charm offensive so smooth that even Greta, who trusted no one, had to admit the man was talented at making bad ideas sound reasonable. He had convinced Amara to restructure 2 client retainer agreements in ways that front-loaded Aria's cash exposure. He had proposed, and she had approved moving 3 months of operating reserves into a short-term investment vehicle that Harlan had suggested. He had also quietly begun discussions with a private equity contact about an exploratory acquisition conversation for Aria Digital, without telling Amara that the contact was connected to the same rival company that had been circling Hale Systems. Amara didn't know any of this. She was busy. She had done 4 interviews in 3 weeks, 2 magazine profiles, a podcast appearance, a speaking engagement in Houston where she had talked for 40 minutes about knowing your worth and refusing to settle. The audience had given her a standing ovation. Greta, back in Los Angeles, was watching the company's cash position with the particular expression of a person watching water drain from a bathtub that nobody else has noticed is draining. She had updated her private file 4 times in the past 10 days, and she had finally decided who she needed to call. Michael picked up on the second ring. "It's Greta." A pause. "I know," he said. "I've been waiting to hear from you." That surprised her. She hadn't expected that. "How much do you know?" she said. "Enough. Tell me what you've seen from your side." She told him everything. The overheard phone call, the name Harlan, the restructured contracts, the reserve transfer, the PE contact. She read from her private file with the precision of someone who had documented everything, because she had known that someday someone would need to hear it clearly. When she finished, the line was quiet for a moment. "Greta," Michael said, "how long has the company got before the cash position becomes critical?" "At current burn rate, with the reserve transfer, 6 weeks, maybe 8. Does Amara know?" "She knows the numbers. I don't think she's read them this week." Another silence. "Are you still keeping that file?" "Yes." "Keep it. Don't talk to anyone at the company." "And Greta?" "Yeah." "Thank you." She exhaled. The kind of exhale that tells you someone has been holding their breath for longer than they realized. "Just fix it," she said. "Whatever you're going to do, just fix it." Nobody saw it coming. That was the point. It happened on a Saturday morning in a small courthouse in Marin County. Just Victoria, Michael, Prescott as a witness, and Dana Cho, who showed up in a blazer and looked like she was there to arrest someone, which was somehow exactly right. There was no announcement, no press, no social media post. Victoria had a strict policy about her personal life and public disclosure. That policy had served her for 14 years in a business where personal exposure was a liability. But Prescott, who could not help himself, sent one text to a college friend in finance. That friend told someone else. And by Monday morning, a financial gossip column in New York, the kind that lives and dies on exactly this type of thing, ran a single paragraph under the headline, "Hale Systems CEO Victoria Hale quietly marries systems architect in weekend ceremony." It named Michael. It noted, almost as an afterthought in the final sentence, that he was the ex-husband of Amara Whitfield of Aria Digital. That afterthought detonated like a charge in dry ground. Within 4 hours, hashtag Mr. Perfect was trending again. But this time, the tone was entirely different. Wait, the human robot married a billionaire. He didn't say a word, just quietly leveled up to a different dimension. Amara called this man too boring. He went and married the woman who runs Hale Systems. "I'm not okay." The quietest man in the room was always the most dangerous. Take notes. The video of the gala, Amara at the microphone, Michael standing still, got another 3 million views in 24 hours. Only this time, nobody was laughing at Michael. Amara saw the headlines at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. She was in her Malibu kitchen, coffee in hand, and she read the notification on her phone once. Then again. Then she set the coffee down on the counter with exaggerated care, the way people do when they need their hands to do something steady, because the rest of them isn't. Victor, sitting at the kitchen island, looked up from his own phone. "You see this?" she said. "Yeah," he said. His voice was neutral. Too neutral. The kind of neutral that is actually the sound of a man recalculating. Amara didn't notice, but she should have. The call from Aria's biggest client came on a Wednesday. They wanted to discuss contract renewal. Specifically, they had questions about Prism, The platform had been integrated into their systems for 4 years, the one written into every deliverable clause in their retainer agreement. Their legal team had been doing routine vendor IP verification and had flagged something. The patent registration on Prism, they said, was not in Aria Digital's name. The woman who took the call, a mid-level account manager named Blythe, who absolutely did not get paid enough for this conversation, said she would need to escalate it and would call them back by end of day. She walked directly to Greta's office. Greta read the note Blythe handed her. Then she closed her office door, picked up her phone, and called Lord Mateo, Michael's patent attorney, whose number she had looked up that morning, because Greta was the kind of person who looked up numbers before she needed them. Lord, bound by client confidentiality, said nothing that was improper, but what she did say was, "I would suggest you speak to your own attorney before end of business today." That was enough. By Thursday, 2 more clients had made similar inquiries. Aria's legal team was an emergency session. The reserve transfer that Victor had arranged had reduced the company's immediate liquidity to a level that made Greta physically nauseous when she looked at the balance sheet. And then Prism started to slow. Not dramatically. Not a crash. Just a quiet degradation in performance. Updates that didn't deploy. Integration requests that queued and stalled. The kind of slow system friction that could have 100 explanations. And every single one of them required the system's owner to fix. The system's owner was not available. By Friday, 3 senior developers had filed internal reports. By Saturday, Amara was on the phone with her tech lead, who told her, very carefully, that without access to the core license structure, there was a ceiling on what they could do. "What does that mean?" Amara said. "It means," the tech lead said, choosing his words with the precision of a man diffusing something, "that Prism doesn't fully belong to us." The silence on the line was absolute. "What did you just say?" He said it again. And in that moment, standing in her Malibu home, in a life she had built on a stage she had decorated herself, Amara Whitfield finally read the name on the patent documents she had never bothered to look at. The emergency shareholder meeting was called for following Tuesday. The venue was the 43rd floor of a Century City office tower, glass and steel, and particular cold brightness of rooms where serious money sits down to discuss serious problems. 12 board members, 3 major investors, 2 of Aria's largest clients who had accepted invitations as observers. Amara walked in at 9 a.m. in a charcoal suit. No red dress today. No chandelier occasion. This was survival mode. She had spent the weekend in back-to-back calls with her attorneys, her accountant, and a turnaround consultant named Graves, who had bluntly told her that without resolving the IP question, the company's valuation was, in his word, theoretical. Victor was not there. She had tried to reach him the night before. The call went to voicemail. The second call, too. The third call, around midnight, connected, and Victor said he needed some space to think, and that he'd explain everything soon, and that she should know he cared about her deeply. She hadn't slept. The board members were already seated when she arrived. Quiet. Too quiet. The way rooms are quiet when people have already had the conversation you're about to walk into. Then the main doors opened. Michael came in first. Navy suit. Open collar. No performances walk. Just the pace of a man who knew exactly where he was going. Behind him, 1 step back and to the right, Victoria Hale walked in wearing gray, her expression the specific blankness of someone who has already decided how this meeting ends. Prescott followed. Dana followed. 2 attorneys followed them. The entire room stood, not directed to, not asked. They simply stood, the way rooms stand when a certain kind of authority enters, not the loud kind, not the performed kind, but the kind that has earned the gravity it carries. Amara did not stand. She gripped the edge of the conference table. Michael met her eyes once, briefly, without cruelty, without performance. Then he looked away and took his seat beside Victoria. Victoria set a single folder on the table, opened it to 1 page, slid to the center where the board could see. "As of this morning," she said, "Hale Systems have completed the acquisition of 71% of Aria Digital's outstanding shares. The remaining structure, including client contracts, operational staff, and the Prism licensing rights, which are being formally transferred today under a separate agreement, will be managed under a new subsidiary. She paused. Your company belongs to us. One of the investors, a man named Feldman who had been in the room for 20 years of these meetings, exhaled through his nose and looked at the ceiling. Another board member said quietly, "How long has this been in motion?" Victoria said nothing. Michael reached into the folder, slid the original Prism patent documents across the table, the filing dates, the registration, his name, clean and formal, exactly where it had always been. Amara looked at those pages. She had seen them before years ago in a kitchen in Pasadena over takeout when she had said, "Just put it in your name for now. We'll sort the legal stuff later." Later had arrived. "You planned this," she said. Her voice was controlled. "Barely." Michael looked at her. "I protected myself," he said. "There's a difference." "How long?" "The patents were always mine. Amara, I didn't change anything. I just stopped pretending they were yours." The room was silent enough that you could hear the building's ventilation system. "Victor," she said suddenly, not at anyone in particular, but as if saying his name might produce him. "Where's Victor?" Prescott, from the far end of the table, opened a second folder. "Victor Langford," he said, "is currently the subject of financial fraud referral file with the California Department of Financial Protection. The restructured client contracts, the reserve transfer, and exploratory acquisition conversations, all conducted without board authorization, are part of that referral. His whereabouts this morning are unknown." Amara stared at him. "He was never here for the company," Greta said. Everyone turned. Greta Bassett had been sitting at the far end of the room, quiet, as she always was, documenting, as she always did. She had been invited by Victoria's team specifically, because her file had been part of the information that made the acquisition move possible. "He was here for Harlan Briggs," Greta continued, "who wanted Aria's client roster and the PE introduction to the rival company. Victor was a key. That's all." Amara looked at Greta with an expression that moved through several floors on its way down, disbelief, recognition, and then something that had no clean name, but looked a great deal like the specific grief of realizing that the people who were loyal to you were not the ones you expected. "You knew," Amara said. "I documented," Greta said. "I warned you about the reserve transfer 3 times. You were busy." The room did not move. The meeting ended at 11:47 a.m. The acquisition was formal. The subsidiary was named. Hale Systems' legal team had been preparing the documentation for 9 days. Everything moved with the speed that real preparation produces. Not rushed, just ready, the way Michael had always worked. The news broke publicly by 2 p.m. By 4 p.m., the internet had fully lost its mind. She told him he was too perfect. He bought her company. "I'm never recovering from this." The patience. This man waited, worked, and let the situation explain itself. That's a doctorate in emotional intelligence. Victor is somewhere on an airplane, pretending he doesn't have a phone. Coward. The original gala video hit 10 million total views by evening. Victor Langford was, as Prescott had noted, unavailable. He resurfaced 2 weeks later through an attorney, which told everyone everything they needed to know. Harlan Briggs' name appeared in a Wall Street Journal piece about a broader SEC investigation 4 days after the boardroom. His connection to Victor, and through Victor, to Aria's financial exposure, became part of that story. Amara came back to Aria Digital's headquarters one last time on a Friday morning. She had not been officially notified she couldn't come. There had been no dramatic cease and desist served to her personally. The acquisition had been handled with precision and without unnecessary theater. But when she arrived at the lobby of the building on Wilshire Boulevard, the building she at least had furnished had filled with 300 people who called her by name. The woman at the reception desk looked up and said very politely, "Good morning. Could I get your name?" Her name, in her own lobby, at her own company. "I'm Amara Whitfield," she said. "I'm—" One moment. The receptionist checked the screen, then looked up. "Ms. Whitfield, I'll need to have someone from building management come down. Your access level has changed as of Monday's transition." Amara stood in that lobby for 45 seconds, long enough to notice what was on the wall. The company logo was the same. Aria Digital. Same font, same colors. But beneath the logo, framed and mounted with the kind of permanence that says this is not a placeholder, were two portraits side by side. Victoria Hale, Michael Whitfield, and down the hall, through the glass door she could see but could not open, the floor where her company operated, her people at their desks, the hum and light of the business she had built, she could hear, faintly, the sound of applause. Not for her. Michael had walked in through the back in trance 3 minutes earlier. She didn't know that, but she heard it. She stood there and she heard 300 people applaud a man she had called too calm, too faithful, too predictable, too boring to love. And something broke in her that morning. Not loudly, not with drama or collapse. Just quietly. The way things break when they've been under too much pressure for too long, and there's finally nothing left pushing back. She walked back to her car. She sat in it for a long time. He knew she had come. The building security system had logged her badge attempt. Someone had told him. He was in the conference room on the 7th floor when one of the account leads knocked and said, gently, that she had come and gone. Michael thanked them, closed the door. He stood at the window and looked out at the boulevard below for a moment. Traffic moving, people walking. The ordinary business of the world continuing at its usual pace, indifferent to every private reckoning happening in offices and parking lots all around it. Then he said, to no one in the room, very quietly, you divorced me for being perfect. Another woman built an empire with those same qualities. Not to wound, not to perform. Just the sentence that was true, finally said in the only room where it needed to be said. Then he turned back to the table, opened his laptop, and went back to work. Here is what the internet never fully understood about Victoria and Michael. It was not a transaction. It was not a narrative convenience. It was not a billionaire rescuing a wounded man or a strategist marrying for leverage. It was two people who had both spent long years being the most capable person in a room and being valued for their usefulness, while the deeper parts of them went unseen. Two people who recognized something in each other at an airport, at a conference table, in a late-night conversation about burning down what you'd built for someone else. Victoria had been married once before, briefly, at 32, to a man who had wanted the idea of her more than the reality. She did not talk about it. But Prescott had been there, and he understood the particular way she looked at men who did not flinch, who did not need applause, who showed up and simply did the work. She had looked at Michael that way since the airport. And Michael, who had spent a decade making himself invisible so that someone else could be visible, found, for the first time in years, that being fully seen by someone who understood exactly what they were looking at was not boring. It was, in fact, the most interesting thing that had ever happened to him. Greta Bassett was named Director of Operations for the ARIA subsidiary under the new structure. She accepted with the particular quiet satisfaction of a person who kept excellent notes and waited for the right moment, and turned out to be right about everything. On her first day in the new role, she bought herself a coffee from the car in the lobby, sat at her new desk, and opened a fresh document. At the top, she typed, Day 1. Then she got to work. Victor Langford resurfaced publicly about 6 weeks after everything collapsed. He did an interview, a podcast, one of those mid-tier ones at traffics in both sides conversations, and calls it fairness. He said he had been misunderstood. He said the financial arrangements had been exploratory. He said Amara had been aware of more than people realized. The internet received this poorly. His name became a different kind of viral, the kind that arrives when everyone has already decided, and you show up trying to reopen a closed case. Harlan Briggs declined to comment on anything. 2 months later, the SEC investigation produced 2 indictments. Victor's name appeared in the supporting documentation. His attorney released a brief statement about cooperating fully. That was the last anyone heard of Victor Langford for a long time. She did not do an interview. She did not post on social media for 43 days. When she returned, a single post, no caption, just a photograph of sunrise over water. The comments were divided, as they always are, between people who forgave her and people who didn't, and people who had opinions about both groups. What happened inside Amara Whitfield in those 43 days is not something anyone outsider can accurately report. But a mutual friend, someone who had been at the gala, who had laughed that night along with everyone else and who had been quietly uncomfortable about that since, said she ran into Amara at a grocery store in West Hollywood 3 months after everything. She said Amara looked different. Not broken, not dramatically transformed, just quieter. The particular quiet of someone who has had a very loud lesson delivered to them in a very public way and has decided to sit with it instead of arguing with it. They talked for 5 minutes, about nothing specific. Before they parted, Amara said one,